Hello and good morning. I watched a rather long presentation this morning on from MIT OpenCourseWare. Has 12,000 views as I look at the screen. It's number 33, Long-Term Biological Effects of Radiation, Statistics and Radiation Risk. This is probably the most comprehensive conversation I've seen. It is huge. Opens into so many areas of contention, of conversations about nuclear safety and nuclear risks. So I'm going to put the link down in the description or the text or comments or somewhere, and you should just stop now and go watch that video. It's so well done. Now, to my it's not saying anything new. This is it was published on September 2019, but I think it's a 2015 or 16 course from Massachusetts Institute of Technology. They are one of the pinnacle nuclear engineering schools on the planet. Their physics department and their physics outreach is equivalent to few other universities in this domain. MIT is one of those DARPA associates. So much of what comes out of MIT ends up being funded by defense agency research projects. That it's interesting. And it is what it is. Decades been like that. So what's in this presentation from 2016 is still old news. This is at decades. This is where we have been not stuck. We have been studying for decades. When you get to the back end of the presentation, they're going to speak a little bit to the linear no-dose graph and the other ideas about ionizing radiation and its effects and its harm, its risks. Down at the very close bottom of that line, again, it's a long video, worth listening to, even if you don't get some of the specifics or details. The concepts within here, and there are dozens of them within this, dozens of domains of sciences and engineering. You could go off and get masters and doctorates galore and pursue knowledge for the rest of your life, which is an interesting idea. So, very good video. Now to the critique. One of the items in there is you listen to him speaking through, and you might have to go back a few times, is radiation exposure measurements. He mentions grays in there. He mentions sieverts. He mentions that there's a conversion, and there's even more details to it. And he mentions that gamma radiation is kind of what he speaks to. But he mentions alpha and beta are that much more dangerous for the reasons I've been describing for years now. If you measure it, the decaying elements haven't decayed yet, are in the air as well as the ones that have decayed. Your proximity to those, to mucous membranes, to inhaling it, to getting it in your eyes, and it could just make you puke and vomit. Japan had a stadium full of people puke and vomit. During that radiation disaster. And bless them for the response to the tsunami. But on top of that, or underneath it, was this TEPCO incident. So that was one of my notes in there, is radiation readings, standardizing and making the conversation stick to the same same, same page. Because he's speaking to grays here, which is in the medical diagnosis arena. So that was one of the points. Now the second point that I noticed, and I have huge issue with, I commented in the video, you might be able to find it. The mention of studying this and looking for this and the outputs, the responses to this. We can bring up 3 nuclear incidents that created radiation exposure cohorts. One in America, 3 Mile Island, exposed almost everybody eastbound of that facility to some levels of radiation distributed across a region. There's a map of it. There are maps of it. You've heard me talk to plume maps. Where does the radiation go? Most of these are heavy molecules that settle out after a disaster. Many of them expire over weeks and months, so looking for them later in time requires such sophisticated instruments that it takes some serious people to go out there and do that type of work. So one radiation cohort created from 3 Mile Island. Number 2 would be Chernobyl. Undeniably one of the largest radiation incidents because of the type of fuel structures in there, caused by operators tuning the reactor to increase outputs with a very questionable fuel source called MOX fuel inside the reactor. TMI suffered that as well, but those are details that seem to be hardly lost. Number 3, cohorts. Medical scientific study victims, intentional or not. Fukushima. The area has been instrumented up. It was instrumented up before the accident happened, and yet we drove a nuclear carrier fleet into a plume of radiation out in the ocean, and we had our helicopter pilots flying out of that. And for that, we had to throw away some sophisticated equipment because the metal gets eaten alive from the inside, which is kind of explained in this video that we're speaking to. This video that speaks to what we know about radiation. So Fukushima cohort is the largest known today of radiation exposed peoples. The medical sciences and studies could prove the linear no-dose threshold model or the other theory. It's a hypothesis at this point, really, because it's not proven that there is some minimum level of radiation required for good. Down at those low dose levels, those doses. So those are my 2 main points I got out of this is, why aren't we studying the largest known medical cohort of radiation exposed people on the planet for the long-term effects of this radiation? I think it's a valid question, especially since this industry wants to build more of these facilities. These millionaires are going across the planet to sell their wares elsewhere, because the conversations get stopped and convoluted here in America. None of these billionaires are building them in their basements, are they? If they're so good, prototype a basement nuclear reactor, eh? You first. All of you people selling this, you first, please. So take a look at the video. The presentation, I envy. I should, but I don't. So peace is out. Please watch that video. It is worth it.